At the outset of this video, I want to say thank you to each of you who have expressed an interest in what we're doing where these little videos are concerned, that focus on integrating the rule of Saint Benedict into our everyday lives here in the world outside of the monastery, and what it means to offer ourselves as oblates of Saint Benedict. And I appreciate your prayers. I covet your prayers as I move forward in preparing these little videos on the rule of Saint Benedict. And Benedict's school is essentially a school of prayer. Prayer is essentially what the school of Benedict is all about. And yes, there are other regulatory things that wrap around that school, that give that school stability in the world, natural things, more physical things, but it's basically a spiritual school of prayer. And he tells us in chapter 43, verses 1 through 3, talking about this school of prayer and the importance of it. On hearing the signal for an hour of the divine office, the monk will immediately set aside what he has in hand and go with utmost speed, yet with gravity and without giving occasion for frivolity. Indeed, nothing is to be preferred to the work of the divine office that we pray. And we've talked a bit about breviaries and that sort of thing. Now, let's think about that for just a minute. The liturgy of the hours is a huge undertaking. Now, the liturgy of the hours, the 4-volume set of the liturgy of the hours is great. I've used it. I've used it quite extensively. And as far as for new people coming into this, beginning to develop a, quote, monastic type of prayer life, I really don't recommend the 4-volume liturgy of the hours. It's great to have. There's a lot of really, really good stuff in there, but it begins more simply. Begin with something smaller. Now, I know the different mother houses and the different monasteries, Benedictine monasteries, may have different recommendations. I know that St. Vincent Arch Abbey recommends several different shorter breviaries, and one of them being Shorter Christian Prayer. And Shorter Christian Prayer is basically a 4-week cycle of psalms and prayers that you can begin anywhere on day 1 of week 1 and begin following it, and then at the end of the 4-week cycle simply start over. And what the Shorter Christian Prayer recommends is that on specific major holy days like Easter or the beginning of Lent or Pentecost, Christmas, Epiphany, those types of days, always go back to the beginning and start over. And that's one option that you have. Christian prayer is get it? Christian prayer, Shorter Christian Prayer. This is a more expansive volume that contains more resources. Shorter Christian Prayer does not require you to have a guide. Christian prayer, and the liturgy of the hours for that matter, if you're going to use Christian prayer or the Liturgy of the Hours, you really need to have the current guide, and without that it's really hard to keep up with where you should be. And so that's two volumes. I've mentioned a number of times the monastic diurnal, and one of the things that we need to remember is that the prayer of the Church, the Liturgy of the Hours, and these volumes that are based on the Liturgy of the Hours are not structured as Benedict directed the Psalms to be structured for prayer in his monasteries. Now, the monastic diurnal, and there's different versions of this, and this particular one that I have is an Anglican publication. Though this little volume incorporates prayers from the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, it also maintains the integrity of the Benedictine ordering of the Psalms. And this little volume is based on the, I've got to open the page here, on this little volume is an English translation of the day hours from the Breviarium Monasticum. Now, that's another option there. As I mentioned, Benedict's school is primarily a school of prayer. The Psalter, the Psalms, take a central seat in the prayer life of the monastery. And we're talking about the Benedictine monastic office based on what we find in this little book. This is also published. There's a Catholic version of this that you can order. I believe it comes from England. It's around $60 or $70 plus shipping to get it here. And I decided that at this age and stage that I did not need to spend the money for that, simply to have that. And it's printed in both English and in Latin. I don't read Latin, I don't speak Latin, so you know, I really don't need something that's written in Latin. I'm reminded of something that an old dead and gone abbot wrote. Dom Prosper, I'm not French, so if I butcher his name, forgive me, Grange. Dom Prosper played an important role in the 1800s in France in the reintroduction of Benedictine monasteries in France. And Dom Prosper, he wrote several volumes in French, and one of those volumes that he wrote was translated from the French into English in 1880, and the title of the book is The Medal or Cross of Saint Benedict. Dom Prosper tells us that there's an ancient tradition which says that God revealed to Benedict that his order should not disappear from the world's stage until the last day, and that in the fierce times preceding the judgment, it being Benedictine's monasteries and the rule of Saint Benedict, it should prove a support to the church and strengthen many in the faith. In my most recent blog, I made mention that when I first became an oblate, I did my novitiate in 2005 and made my final promises, my solemn promises, in 2006. And when I first discovered Saint Benedict and the rule of Saint Benedict, I was convinced then that Saint Benedict offers to the world, not only the world, but also to the church, the solution to its multiplied problems. I believe that even more today when I look at the mess that the world is in, and I look at the throes, the struggles that the church is going through. How much more? How much more the world and the church needs something like this to wrap their minds around and structure their lives around, because not only is the rule of Saint Benedict good for monasteries, it deals so much over and again with personal relationships, how to get along, how to live our lives in such a way that our lives are pleasing to God and always a blessing and encouragement to other people.